And so pleased to be joined by John Peachey, who is Chief People Mechanic from the Think Farm, thethinkfarm.org, and he joins us on the program now. JP, kia ora. Good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm doing very well indeed. I must say, I love what you've done with the place. For those people that are listening to this, may I describe, you've renovated your virtual background, which is much easier to do than renovating an actual background. I can tell you from experience, less splinters for a start. But a bit of a shout out to, this is your set, if you like, for your Think Farm podcast, I understand.
It is, yes, and I mean no splinters, but still a lot of angsting over getting it right, and a lot of people criticising and commenting, shall we say? But yes, it's my little virtual background. It's probably the place I'd love to work from. Maybe that's the way to best describe it. But yeah, I have a new podcast called the People Mechanics Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to leaders about leadership and what they struggle with and what they're great at, and all that kind of stuff. So so that's my new little virtual house to hide in.
Very much encourage people to check that out, thethinkfarm.org, of course, for more information about not just the podcast, but other good things as well. The topic that we're talking about today, JP, and this will be an interesting one, talking about binary issues. Not necessarily those binary issues, although honestly, if you say binary issues in today's cultural climate, you're going to get a reaction. It might be a good thing to talk about on your podcast. Perhaps you'd surely get some listens and some likes on and some dislikes on that one.
You would certainly get some reaction. There's no question about that. Yeah, and there'll be no grey area in that conversation, I can tell you. So it'd be interesting, really. It's a weird world that we live in. That we live in what I describe the right and wrong, yes and no world now. And I've been observing the protests in the States and some of it here. And apart from the fact that, democracy has always afforded people the right to protest.
Yep.
But the moment you start occupying buildings, smashing and causing damage, one of the university's library has been absolutely decimated by these folks. And it's like, you've now lost your argument, right? There's no sympathy when you start destroying public property and start abusing the right of things like libraries. We forget that we live in a first world nations. Where a lot of kids around the world wouldn't have known what a library was, let alone a book. So I mean, it's kind of interesting. So you destroy your own argument. But what is happening, I think, worldwide, and it's been happening for a while, is that there is no grey area in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to ask questions any longer. You're either for or against a subject. You're on or you're off. You're right or you're wrong. That is the abdication of intellect, which I think biblically, apart from anything else, means that we're being stupid. I mean, the Bible doesn't tell you to cut your brain off. Faith doesn't mean closing your eyes and closing your ears. God's given us a highly intelligent, piece of grey matter that can wrestle things through.
To be fair, though, the history of the church has been quite binary. You're in or you're out, you're right or you're wrong, you're going to heaven or you're going to hell, you're a saint or a sinner. That's been our narrative for, at least 1,000 of the couple of thousand years since then. It seems that some people are picking up on this, though. And look, I was playing with words in terms of the binary issue. We're not talking about genders here, although that is perhaps an area where people have a firm view, which you're either friendly or a hater in that regard. But of course, what is certainly dominating headlines at the moment are things such as climate change, or what's happening in Gaza at the moment. You're either all in or you're all out. You can't have a nuanced opinion about either of these topics, otherwise you're likely to get something thrown at you.
The moment you ask a question, and yes, there are interviewers who are being antagonistic, I guess, in their questioning format, but if the average person asks a question about Palestinian or Israeli history, about the Jewish people in other context. I mean, climate change is an absolutely classic example of this.
Yeah.
You may not suggest that there is a third option here.
Mm-hmm.
You simply cannot question. I mean, there's enough statistics around climate change to make people go, well, hang on a minute. But even put the science aside for a moment. I always ask the question when it comes to climate change, well, where does the money go?
Yeah.
Well, who's taking all this money from these carbon credits? How does that work exactly? Well, again, you could be shut down, called an idiot, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're whatever. I mean, all the language comes out.
Hmm.
But I think it behooves us, there's that wonderful word, it behooves us to be asking questions, is to actually switch our intellect on and say, that doesn't make sense. Can you explain it to me? But even that, you see, when even you ask the question, can you explain to me your position?
Mm.
You're likely to get something thrown at you, and again, labeled as whatever. It's just not smart. It's just not smart. My classic example is the pyramid, is what I call the pyramid theory.
Yep.
We don't understand how the pyramids were built.
Hmm.
Therefore, we say it must have been aliens. Right? That's the stupidity. That's how stupid we are.
Yeah.
Right? Is to say I don't understand. Maybe it's because, and I wrote an article about this. Maybe it's because we've actually lost our intellect. Maybe they had some intellect, some skills that they knew back then, 4,700 years ago,
Yeah.
that we just don't have today.
To borrow a line from Monty Python, there must be some intelligent life out there in space because there's not much here on Earth, honestly.
Well, what's it tell our young people, right? I mean, our tertiary institutions, their function is to wrestle with you with knowledge in your brain, right?
Yeah.
That is the idea, is that you go in with some preconceived ideas and you dig into it, you experiment, you try and fail. Now you can't do that. I mean, I mean, God's sake, you can't even say I don't believe in what you're saying, because you're just going to get slaughtered. I mean, it's crazy business, right? But I just don't think that I think it's an assault on our intellect. I think that's what it is.
There are some topics that people feel passionate about, and I think the real enemy of intellect is rage, I suppose. But there are some situations where it may be appropriate to have righteous anger. And there will be people listening to this who will say, well, the planet not being inhabitable should be something that we're engaged and enraged about. The bombing of civilians and the death of thousands of children should be something which we're engaged and enraged about. Some people would say abortion is a topic which we should be engaged and enraged about. The passion that comes with some of this in some ways pushes back against having a calm conversation because we are so passionate. Yeah. But look, maybe climate change isn't your cause, but maybe pro-life issues is. You can understand why people have just got up such a head of steam, John.
Yeah, I love passion. I think we need to be passionate. I think, in fact, again, I think scripturally we're called to be passionate. I mean, Jesus was passionate. Classic story, feeding the 5,000. He saw them, he looked at them, he had compassion on them.
Yeah.
And what did he do? He reacted, he responded, and he fed them. He did something with it. And I think we're called to do that, no question whatsoever. And I love the passion of these young people. But the moment your violence and your narrative shuts everybody else down because you can't stand the thought that they might not agree with you, you've really destroyed your own argument. I remember back at school, high school, we had school diaries. I think we bought them, school diaries, and at the top or bottom of each page, can't remember which now, long time ago, but there was a quote. It was a famous quote, and the one which has always stuck in my mind for 50 years is the quote that he who has reason on his side need not shout.
Wow. He
who has reason on his side need not shout. And I've always looked at that and thought, absolutely, let's have a quiet conversation. But the issue here is one of maturity. The mature intellect, the mature person in society says, man, I listened to that person talk. I didn't realize this, and this. I might need to rethink my position. Mm-hmm. But the way that we're being taught right now is that we can't change our position. It's like, you're a Republican or a Democrat in the States, and that's it. Never the twain shall meet. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And no, it's tragic, I think. And again, I think it's a God-given right to push into Scripture. Doesn't God say somewhere in the Bible? Dare I quote the Bible about come and wrestle with me? Come and wrestle with these things. Come and let's reason together. Let's argue. Yep. Let's pull it apart. What was Jesus doing at 12 years of age on the steps of the temple, wrestling and arguing with the learned men and leaving them with their gobs wide open?
They were probably really angry. I imagine. Who do you think you are? Well, that's a story for another time. When it comes to that, though, when it comes to the reason that we've become so binary, and look, there are things that people have got black and white views on, and that's as old as time, but it seems to be the way in which general society is trending at the moment on a number of hot-button issues. What's behind this societal change? Can we jump in and pile on and say, oh, it's the internet, or it's some bad stuff that happened in lockdown, or is it just perhaps a lack of a positive role model, a lack of leadership in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question, really. I mean, I think the lack of leadership is really evident now. It's becoming more and more evident that we're lacking quality leadership at every level in society. And we're blaming all sorts of things. But actually, in the world that I come from, the culture of any organization, the outcomes are established, set up, and maintained by the senior leader.
Yeah.
And without that, and that works in our parishes, it works in our churches. And if we don't have people who are leading with strength and conviction and direction and skills, then we're in trouble. See, I think there's an underlying subtext. Interesting you raise this, because I think the protesting young people, yes, there's some professional protesters and adjutants amongst the group, no question about that. But I think there's a question going on in our young people's minds, or a statement when they look at the world, they look at the Palestinian Gaza situation. It is indicative of them going, you guys have not led this well.
Yeah.
Talking about my generation. Mm-hmm. They're looking at us going, heck no. And our response is to label them Gen Z, Gen X, or millennials and say, you're this, you're that, try and package them.
Yeah.
And I think they're kicking out against that. They're looking at the future and going, what have you done for us? You know, what have you left us? And that would be a very legitimate question. And I think the same question applies within our churches. I think our young people are voting with their feet in churches because they're looking at the way we've done things and go, I don't think so.
Yeah. And hey, have that situation modelled where, you know what, you can have a robust conversation with somebody that you disagree with and still respect each other at the end of that conversation, where you can go toe-to-toe with somebody who is passionate about what they believe and not necessarily get into a punch-up over it, to be modelling what leadership looks like, where you are persuading people in a non-manipulative way that you are taking them on your intellectual journey with you, rather than just saying, hey, it's my way or the highway. Again, perhaps some lessons for the church.
If that's the way we lead churches, if that's the way we lead organisations, with it's my way or the highway, and unfortunately our churches are predominantly set up with there is no questioning of the senior leader in reality. They're the senior leader, the senior spiritual director, or spiritual person in the church. Yeah. I'm always encouraging people. I always say to people, when was the last time you had a discussion in church? When was the last time someone in the pews raised their hand and said, oh, can I just ask you about what you've just preached on, what you've just said? Yeah. That just doesn't happen, right? And
almost like there's a sign at the back of the church which says, hallelujahs only positive affirmation during the preaching. And hey, as a preacher yourself, John, it's more fun to have people affirm you while you're preaching than to throw brickbats at you, right?
Oh, look, absolutely. And in my professional work, this is what happens. Someone rings me, wants to book some time with me, sit down with me and say, this is what I'm experiencing in reality. What do you think about that? And then we have a discussion / disagreement about how to deal with that. And it's much more beneficial when you can wrestle with, because you can see what, passion and anger to me are the same thing in a lot of cases. When someone's angry about something, it's because they're passionate about something. Mm-hmm. Now, the way it comes out might not be fantastic, but how dare we? Did Jesus deal with angry people, with people who are opposing? Because they'd learnt another system, right? They'd learnt a system, and he's coming in and he's tipping the tables over. So I bet there were some angry conversations. It's the model that we have been set, is to question, to argue, and to counsel with each other. That's the important thing, I think.
And hey, a good example of what some good, robust conversation looks like, of course, the People's Mechanic podcast. You can find out more information at thethinkfarm.org. JP, always a pleasure to wrestle with you. Gosh, that sounded better in my head than it did out loud.
Yes. No mud wrestling, please.
To rhetorically wrestle with you, JP, thanks for being on the program today.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.